Throughout the ages, history has been altered by word of mouth and the misrepresentation of those who might not have been present when some of the world's most significant events took place. Channelers Barry and Connie Strohm bring through the spirits of those who actually witnessed or took part in these historical events and lets them tell their stories in their own words. Welcome to Channeling History. And now, here are your hosts, Barry and Connie Strohm.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Channeling History. We're the only show where we speak to the souls that make things happen, and all of our guests are on the other side, so you're not going to hear them on any other shows. We're brought to you on the Parax Radio Network. I'm Barry Strohm, your host, and I'll be doing the channeling tonight.
And I'm Connie Strohm, your co-host, and I'd like to thank you all for joining our show tonight. I'll be asking the questions of our spirit guests tonight. Last week, we were honored to have the spirit of Princess Diana on our show. She gave us great insight into what is currently happening with the royal family, as well as into the events that surrounded her death. The show's available on Podomatic.com for download or on our YouTube channel. That was an outstanding show. She was a really great soul. This evening, we're going to speak with the spirits of President Franklin Roosevelt, a proponent of liberal policies, and Rush Limbaugh, the famous conservative talk show host. Our discussion tonight should be quite interesting.
I think quite interesting is probably an understatement, Connie. Well, there's going to be a lot of people disagree with something they hear tonight, so I'm going to do the disclaimer. The options or statements voiced on our show are the channeled words of the spirits and do not necessarily reflect our opinions, those of the Parax Network, or those of our sponsors, if we had any. We welcome suggestions for future shows, or please submit questions for our spirit guest or email channelinghistory@parax@gmail.com.
We welcome your questions tonight through the chat room. While we do have questions prepared for our guests, we do try to use the questions from our listeners as much as possible.
Now, when we begin channeling tonight, Connie will ask the questions, and I'll answer the questions in the words of the spirits. But before we start, we always say a prayer of protection. So Connie's going to say the prayer, and we're going to begin to channel with the spirits of President Roosevelt and Rush Limbaugh.
God, please grant us your wisdom and protection. Grant us the knowledge that we can handle and keep us safe from all things that will harm us. Keep the messages positive and pure love. Keep us safe from our egos. We ask these things in the light of the seen, the unseen, and the honesty of God.
Okay, Connie, it's going to be a good one. I know I'm looking forward to hearing the answers to some of our questions. So let's first begin with speaking with President Franklin Roosevelt.
President Roosevelt, thank you so much for joining us this evening. Would you like to begin with a message?
Absolutely, Connie. Have you ever heard of a politician that would shut up when given the right to speak? I'd like to thank you for inviting me back. It's been quite a while since I've been able to be in the public eye, but I think in many ways that's a good thing. Today, the United States is facing many problems. When I was president, it was facing many problems. We were in the midst of a terrible depression. The Dust Belt, people were having trouble raising food. The homeless, the unemployed. It was a terrible time in our history. I did many things that I thought would help. I made mistakes like everybody else, but I had good intent. Good intent is very important among humans. Today, I fear many people don't have good intent. I knew that many things were going wrong. I knew that Nazi Germany was rising in power. Japan was an imperial power. I knew that we were headed towards many, many problems and probably wars, which we were. But I did the best I could. I believed that people should have safety nets. I believed that people should have been taken care of. I believed many things, and I tried to do what I could. And I think when I was finished, the world was a better place for me being president at that time. So I do understand, and I help look at some of these questions, and I'm anxious to answer some of them. So, Connie, when you're ready, I am.
Good, because I'm anxious to hear some of your answers. Let's begin with, how would you describe the liberal beliefs during the 1930s?
Liberalism had made several attempts. Teddy Roosevelt, he had tried to bring in some social programs. He did, after all, establish a national park system. Many would believe that that was a liberal policy of the time. There were really very little safety nets. Our government was struggling. Our economies seemed to be either boom or bust. Liberal beliefs felt that individuals should be helped by government. I believed that government knew best. I see today that possibly I'm not correct, but if you were living in those times, and you have to look at those times in the eye of history, then the more I felt that the more that could be done by government to help the people, the better off the government would be. So I think liberal beliefs in those days were just simply putting safety nets and showing people how they could exist when things beyond their control were making it very hard for them.
You stated the Liberal Party believes that as new conditions and problems arise beyond the power of men and women to meet as individuals, it becomes the duty of the government itself to find new remedies with which to meet them. Do you still believe that is true?
Yes, I do. Government has grown so huge today that it is very difficult for the individual to affect what takes place and what policies are brought in to help them, or in many instances, to not help them. It is only through elected individuals that things can take place under the current government of the United States. That was also true back in my time. The people, the majority of the people, had to say in how things would take place and what governmental policies would come into being. Now, I admit today that government has grown out of control, that it is huge, that it is very, very difficult to control, and that it is very, very difficult to even monitor what takes place. I would be the first to admit now that money is squandered. Many in the military, in political power in Congress, they have no idea just how the money is being squandered. But if government doesn't protect the people, then there's nothing left. The government is the be-all and the end-all of how people are cared for in the country. There's really very little other choices.
The main policy of your administration is described as the New Deal. Would you explain to us the main aspects of the New Deal?
The main aspects of the New Deal is that government would step in and try to take care of the people. The Depression had a terrible effect on everyone. In my concept, the government would come in, provide jobs, provide safety nets, provide your Social Security. Keep in mind that before the New Deal, there was no way that people of very low incomes could have any type of savings to protect them in their old age. I felt that the government needed to step in and do as much as possible for the people. I know that In certain instances, the government took this to extremes, but I felt that the New Deal offered hope to the people. There were millions of people that had no hope when I came into office. At least when I left, there were people that were participating in social programs that would give them hope.
How would you describe a liberal philosophy today?
Today, I would describe a liberal philosophy as being quite different than what it was in my time. I was a pioneer. I was trying to establish new programs that would give basic control and help to the people. Today, I think that many liberal policies are actually quite dangerous in the long run. It appears as though the liberal of today has no concept of fiscal responsibility. Many of your programs, such as many of the environmental programs, are incredibly costly and do not represent an efficient allocation of the funds that are available. Today, it appears as though liberal philosophy shows relatively little fiscal responsibility. I knew in my time that I had to spend a lot of money because of the severe situations that were taking place. Today, people have a basic standard of living. Poverty in the United States today is a standard of living higher than poverty in many of the other countries. Liberal responsibility, in many instances today, as I observe, makes the safety nets much more than simple safety nets. Today, big government is what is controlling the country. There are so many laws and restrictions today that try to take a human and control them from birth to death. While I believe, and still do and always will, that there needs to be basic foundations of safety for the people. For instance, the military must protect them, and you must do whatever is required to keep the country safe. I believe that there should be universal health protection for everyone. I believe that the Social Security should be strong, that people, when they pay the money into a system, that they should be able to receive the benefits of it with no doubts. Many of the programs have been abused. But I think that today the trend is towards over control of the people. America grew strong because of individualism, because of all the rights that are attributed to people in the Constitution. I think that today government, in many instances, trends to take away personal liberties in the interest of providing overall care. I think the motives are still good, but I think many of the methodology of the current liberal philosophies leave somewhat to be desired.
So if you were alive today, would you still associate with the modern liberal philosophy? Maybe try to change their minds a bit?
I would try to be a moderate liberal. I would attempt to bring in legislation that would protect human rights, that would assure that the constitutional rights are preserved. I would also attempt to bring in universal health care. I would attempt to provide all of the basics that individuals need to survive. Keep in mind that the government policies are taking away many of those basics through things such as inflation, high taxation, such things as that. I would try to provide a basic foundation that protects the rights of the individuals.
How would you define the difference between modern liberalism and socialism?
I would never propose that the government takes over ownership of many of the institutions that are privately held at this time. I think the difference between liberalism and socialism is basically in the ownership of the assets that are utilized to preserve the foundation for basic survival. I feel that liberalism can work with democracy where socialism will never work, period.
Yeah. Do you believe liberal policies have served individuals in the inner cities?
As I watch from this side, I see that the policies in general have failed those that live in the inner cities. I see that educational opportunities are being taken away from the children that live in poverty or in the lower income brackets in the inner cities. They are not provided the opportunities. I think that you should blame the politicians rather than the policies of which they speak. Many of the policies of which the politicians speak would give great help to those living in the inner cities. But the individuals fail to follow through. They do not serve those individuals well. So there's a difference between the concept of liberalism and what it would do for the individuals and how in actuality the politicians carry out those promises.
Yes. If you were alive, what changes would you make in policies in the inner cities?
The first thing that I would do is I would assure that the schools have got proper funding. I would allow freedom of choice in the schools, and yes, I know that's a conservative thing that most liberals are opposed to. I would allow the children of increased abilities to seek the education that they deserve. I would provide vocational education, and I would try to set up a system where the individual, the young, are provided with employment. I would try to bring businesses in that would dedicate themselves, and I would provide very strong law enforcement in the inner cities. Employers will not come into cities where they have to fear for the safety of themselves, their businesses, and for their employees. I know that this is not sounding like a liberal, but I would provide the strongest law enforcement policies to make sure that those businesses could thrive and hire people that live locally that need the employment.
Do you believe modern liberalism can lead the United States into the future?
Not in its entirety. I believe that there has to be a compromise. I firmly believe that government should provide a safety net. I believe that they should provide foundational services, protections that they should assure that the cost of living through inflation does not get out of control. They should do many things, but they need to compromise. They need to understand that individual rights are very important. Government needs to encourage the public sector to hire individuals. Government can never productively hire enough people to assure full employment. Policies of government have got to encourage businesses to hire individuals. They have to protect the integrity of the dollar, and they have to assure that unfair foreign competition does not lead to unemployment. There are many things that government can do, but if they attempt to do too much, then it will become a disaster.
Yes. Why do you think academia identifies with liberalism?
I think that liberalism is a very popular concept. I think that the concept of providing all of these things for individuals is very attractive to academia. But I do not think they take into consideration all of the downside that is associated with taking the rights away from individuals when government controls everything. I believe that academia teaching our younger generations that government is the total answer is doing great damage.
Yes. Do you believe that modern liberal politicians are attempting to make the citizens of the United States totally dependent on the government?
There are those that would do that, but there are also moderate liberals. Now, admittedly, it is more difficult to find them in government because the trend has been towards more liberal policies in the last periods of time. But I do think that many of our politicians truly believe that the more dependent citizens are on government, the better off it will be for the people. The reality is that the more dependency that people are made upon the government simply strengthens the government.
The current national debt is approaching $32 trillion and rapidly increasing. Do you think the United States can continue to exist into the future with such rapidly increasing national debt?
Do you think that an individual can run huge amounts of debt, and when they reach a point that they cannot service that debt, that they can continue to function? The answer is no. The government will reach a point where service of the debt becomes intolerable. When interest rates increase as they are today, then it becomes more expensive to service the debt. I cannot conceive of the amount of $32 trillion. I cannot see any way that the government can pay that debt off. They have spent, and this is both Democrat and Republican parties, they have spent like the proverbial drunken soldiers. The government has to prioritize the most effective way of spending the funds that are available to them.
At the present time, almost 180,000 undocumented immigrants are entering the U.S. each month. Do you agree with this policy? And if not, what would you do concerning illegal immigration?
I am very sympathetic to how these immigrants are suffering in their home countries. I wish that more could be done to make their standard of living acceptable in those countries. They look at the United States and they see how even those in poverty are living so much better than they are, and they want to become a part of this country. I totally understand, but we only have limited resources. It may not seem that way, but we only have so many tax dollars that can be allocated to paying for the social costs of these immigrants. There has to be a compromise in how many people are allowed into the country. If we allow open borders, then we will reach a point that we can no longer support our social systems. The taxes are paid by the citizens of the country. Some now, admittedly, undocumented immigrants do pay some taxes. But if they are allowed to participate in the full benefits of this nation, then there will be a time that there will not be enough funds available to service the needs of the people. There has to be a legal compromise on how many individuals are allowed into this country, and that has to be based realistically on what we can afford.
Sir, what do you consider the greatest accomplishment of your presidency?
I absolutely believe that my New Deal policies and bringing the country out of deep depression are the greatest accomplishments of my presidency. I think that even though there were problems with it, that it was not 100% successful. But I do believe that that is my greatest accomplishment.
Okay. What is your opinion of the role of the Federal Reserve today?
I feel that the Federal Reserve is exceeding the authorities that were originally thought to be invested into them. The Federal Reserve has shown to be more of a political organization than as an independent organization that controls our monetary policy and interest rates. They should have never allowed this great current inflation to have taken place.
Yeah. Okay. As you watch from the other side, what is your opinion of the neutrality in our justice system?
As we watch from over here, we are seeing problems with the justice system. Lady Justice is supposed to wear a blindfold. Now, I will admit, when I was president, I tried to do things that were probably not what I should have done. I tried to increase the number of Supreme Court justices because they were ruling against many of my policies, and I was wrong when I did that. Justice needs to be blind, and there needs to be only a single tier of justice. Today you are seeing politicians taking advantage of the justice system. I think that that is very, very dangerous.
Thank you so much, Mr. President, for joining us this evening. Do you have a final message for us?
Yes, I do have a final message. I hope that the political parties can compromise, and I hope that they can reach some agreement on policies that will be best for the country. The answer does not lie in individuals in the far left, and it does not lie in individuals in the far right. The vast majority of individuals in the United States are basically in the middle of the road in their beliefs. Radicalism on either side is not the answer. As government grows, so does its problems. As government grows, the infringement on personal rights are a fact. I hope that the two parties can come to an agreement, can work together, and truly make democracy what it should be for the people of this country. So thank you for allowing me to speak. I truly appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you, sir. We appreciate your coming with us.
Yes, thank you so much, President. You definitely have a good way of looking at things. So thank you very much. Okay, now we're going to talk with Rush Limbaugh. Rush has never been bashful about speaking what's on his mind, and I am certainly looking forward to hearing him tonight. So, Connie?
Good evening, Rush. Thank you for joining us. I know this is a silly question, but would you like to begin with a message?
Oh, yes, I truly would like to begin with a message. I tried my best to bring conservatism to the people of the United States. I truly believe that conservatism is the only way that government can be controlled and that the future can be assured. I always believed in the personal right, the integrity of individuals. I believe that the free enterprise system is the absolute answer to solving many of our problems. I would point to the great advances that are being made in our space system since we turned to private enterprise. I can give you many, many examples of how the individual can outperform government. The growth of government will kill our nation. In my mind, there has to be strict controls. Spending has to be controlled. Waste has to be stopped. There are many things that individuals can do that government cannot. And those that believe that government is the answer will bury this country. So thank you for allowing me to speak tonight. And I as well look forward to answering some questions.
Good. Let's start with, how would you describe conservative beliefs during the 1930s?
There were many problems with this. Government was growing so rapidly. The stock market, financial systems, free enterprise was running into the need for conservative controls. There was really no way to control the excesses that people were bringing to the financial system. There were no controls as to how many of the farming technologies were being used to destroy the land. Immigration, people were rushing into our country. There were really very little conservative controls. Hoover was trying to basically leave his fingers off of things. It was truly a time that controls were needed and they were not added. But conservative beliefs were strictly more of a laissez-faire thing. It was leave your fingers off. We did need to become involved in many things and many controls. What we did not need was for government to take total control.
How would you describe conservative beliefs today?
I think conservative beliefs today believe in the individual. If the individual is left to thrive, if they are not overtaxed, if businesses are allowed to be run in a manner that is effective, if protections are provided from countries where child labor brings products in that destroy jobs here. If immigration is controlled so that the social services are not overrun in this country, I think that is what conservatives believe in today.
Okay, one of our listeners has a question for you. How did you feel when you were awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom?
I was overwhelmed. I had tried to do my best through the years to bring people the information that I thought would allow them to thrive, that would help our country to thrive. The Medal of Freedom was one of my finest moments.
Do you believe the New Deal of the Roosevelt presidency was a success?
I believe that portions of it were a success. I do not believe that enough was done to promote individual freedoms and individuals from trying to lead the way out of the Depression. I do not believe it was a total success, but it was a help. It provided jobs when jobs needed to be provided, and it did provide some social net things that were a help. But I believe that it was not until the beginning of the war, where so many jobs were created, that we truly came out of the Depression.
If you had been alive during the Great Depression of the 1930s, how would you have handled getting back to prosperity?
I would have tried to promote businesses. Instead of the government providing jobs, I would have tried to stimulate businesses into providing long-lasting jobs, projects, road construction. I would have done as many things or projects as possible to have private enterprise lead the way.
Do you believe modern conservatism is capable of leading the United States into the future?
I believe that modern conservatism should be the foundation. It takes compromise, and it takes politicians working together. What is needed through all levels of government is reform. There is graft and corruption throughout all levels of government and throughout all political parties. The people need to step up and elect honest politicians. That would be the first main step in leading our country into the future. Government spending has to be controlled. Debt has to be paid back. That is real. We have to be very careful in allowing foreign countries to invest in the United States. It is foolhardy to let China buy huge areas of land and businesses. China is our enemy. We have to accept that. We have to prevent them from controlling assets in this country. We have to do everything that is necessary to assure that our government can continue to function into the future. And to do that, we must have a strong military, and we must control our borders.
Rush, what do you consider the main problem with modern liberalism?
Insane spending. They come up with these projects like the Green New Deal. They put projects throughout the country that are ineffective. They try to stop the production of electrical energies in many areas. They push projects that are ill-conceived. For instance, forcing people into electric vehicles is foolhardy when we don't have the electrical grid system to support charging those vehicles. Progress takes time. When you force individuals to conduct their lives in ways that cannot be supported, then you create problems. Liberalism is doing this. Liberalism doesn't want you to use your gas stoves. They want to prevent automobiles from burning gasoline. They want to force people into electric vehicles. The vast majority of people in this country can't afford electric vehicles, yet they're trying to legislate to force them into that. Liberalism needs to step back and think in terms of what is truly possible.
Do you see any cure for the immigration problem in the future?
We have allowed such intense immigration in the past years that is going to create such long-term problems for us. Illegal immigration is something that must be controlled. I am not saying there should not be any immigration, but I am saying that it has to be selective. If we allow untrained immigrants into our social system, we will create social expenses far beyond anybody's expectations.
Okay, we have an interesting question from one of our listeners. Now that you're on the other side and have a true picture of what's going on, what is the most shocking revelation you discovered?
The most shocking revelation, and I always suspected it, but the amount of graft and corruption in our government is beyond any belief. I would be hard-pressed to point out any major politicians that have not been influenced through large contributions. I think that graft and corruption is the largest surprise, and I am not easily surprised because I expected it. But the scale is phenomenal.
Yes, that's very sad and frightening. Why are individuals with liberal beliefs promoting these open borders?
They think that by allowing an unlimited number of immigrants into the country and by legislating ways for them to vote, that they can assure that the Democratic Party will continue to be basically a one-party system into the future.
What, in your opinion, has been the cause of the growth in the rate of inflation?
The Federal Reserve has been like the proverbial drunken sailor in printing money. Printing money leads to inflation. Printing money allows the government to fudge the numbers, to not show exactly what is taking place. Large amounts of cash will cover many of the basic economic problems that are taking place in our economy. If there is cash to cover, then it is possible that inflationary trends can remain hidden for a while. But if you print vast amounts of money, and that's what they did during COVID, that was part of the plan behind COVID. If they allow great inflation in our economy, it increases the dependency of people with lower income levels. It increases their dependency upon the government. You see, this is all part of the plan. COVID was part of the plan to allow the printing of money. Inflation raises the cost of living to a point that our young people cannot afford to buy houses, cannot afford to create equity on their own, forces them to be dependent upon government housing. Governments need to worry about the people and not about their own pocketbooks.
So, if you were in charge, Rush, how would you lower the rate of inflation?
We are now in an area of great problems. The inflation has created a situation where individuals are having trouble paying their bills. If you stop printing money, in the short term, it will create problems for individuals. But you have got to get control. If you raise taxes, it will create a problem that will probably lead us to a recession. Government has put us in a very difficult position. I would start by slowing the rate of spending. I would try to stimulate the growth of private investment through selective lowering of taxes. I would try to do everything I can to make the private sector take control of the economy.
What is your opinion of the role of the Federal Reserve?
I think that they have been a dismal failure. The printing of money has led to the inflation. They were slow to raise interest rates to slow it because they did not want it to reflect negatively on the president, on the Democratic government that we currently have. I think that the entire role of the Federal Reserve should be investigated and that there should be restrictions put upon them. They basically operate without any controls from our government.
So, who do you think should be the next president of the United States?
That is a loaded question. I'm not sure that I see great leadership from either party at this point. Everyone that is running for president at this time has limitations. Everyone has problems. I especially do not believe that an individual in his 80s should be president. I just think that the aging process has stepped in and that our current president should consider not running for a second term. I see problems with our ex-president running. I see problems with many of the individuals. So I think that I'm just simply not going to comment any further.
Okay. Do you think there's any hope of controlling the national debt in the future?
Absolutely. The first step is to get rid of waste. Governmental waste on pet projects, on wasteful spending, is a phenomenal number. Start by controlling what you can control. Stop putting projects in that are of very limited value. If you looked at many of the research projects that are funded, it's a joke. Start with controlling waste. Then eliminate projects that truly do not benefit people. Give the president the option of a line item veto. so that he can go into the budget and eliminate projects that are truly wasteful. Know that in the future you have to service the debt that you have. The national debt is not going to be controlled in the very near future. It has to be a long-term plan because it has grown so hysterically through the years.
How do you think we should handle the homeless problem?
First of all, you need to find out the individuals that want to get off the street. Those are the ones that you help first. Give them vocational education, help them find jobs, find private companies that want to hire people like that. Start with the veterans. There are many veterans that have mental disabilities. Treat them. The government owes that to them in the first place. They should not ever have a veteran of the United States military on the streets. Everything that you do with the homeless needs a long-term plan. If you just simply put them into a government facility and they don't have the ability to find work or to pay for that facility, they'll just be back on the street. You have to start with the foundation of helping them. Government simply taking them off the street without education, without guidance, without all of the things that it takes for them to stand on their own 2 feet is a total mistake.
What do you consider the greatest threat to the future of the United States, and what steps would you take to solve that problem or those problems?
I think that the national debt is the greatest risk. Second, I would talk about the graft and corruption of our politicians. What is required is an honest news network. There has to be agencies or news organizations that tell the truth about the graft and corruption. The evil politicians or the corrupt ones have to be driven out of government and be replaced by people that are honest. I think that would be the first and possibly the easiest step.
Yeah. So as you're watching from the other side, what is your opinion of neutrality in our justice system?
Our justice system has been politicized. If you look, there is no equality. The IRS was used to discriminate against conservatives. You're seeing corruption at the highest levels that is not being prosecuted properly. The graft and corruption at the highest levels of our government is being protected by the justice system. Until somebody steps in and assures that there is a single level for everyone, the neutrality of our justice system is currently non-existent.
I have an interesting question from one of our listeners. Who were you most excited to be able to have a conversation with once you reached heaven?
I enjoyed being able to talk with all of the ancient philosophers. I actually enjoyed being able to speak with my friend here, President Roosevelt. We have differences, but if you listen to him closely, you will see that he has understood what needs to be done into the future, just the same as his opinions have changed some of my thoughts. Heaven is the place of great compromise. Since there is no hatred here, I have truly enjoyed speaking with some of the past presidents, Lincoln, Washington. I enjoyed speaking with those that drafted the Constitution. As you know, I'm a strong constitutionalist, and I have truly enjoyed speaking with those individuals.
As you watch from the other side, oh, I'm sorry. Politicians of both parties raided the Social Security Fund throughout the years. What steps would you take to save Social Security for our future generations?
Very difficult steps have to be taken with Social Security because of what past politicians have done to the system. Taxes have got to be increased. The age of retirement has got to be raised realistically. People making vast amounts of income have got to be taxed higher to compensate for those that cannot truly put money into the system. There are ways to do it. It is just simply a matter of biting the bullet and doing what is necessary.
Okay, Rush, thank you for joining us this evening. It's always fun hanging out with you. Do you have a final message for us?
Yes. I'd like to thank you, first of all, for allowing me to speak. You know that has never been a problem for me. I do, now that I'm on the other side, I do actually have a better understanding of what is taking place. I fear greatly for the future of the United States. I am astonished at the amount of corruption and graft that is in our governmental system today. The news agencies have actually contributed to this. When the Constitution was formed, freedom of speech was intended to assure that the newspapers, the reporters of the time, the news agencies would discover what was going on, would try to show the information. Today, many people are protected by the news agencies. When bad things happen, generally to the Democratic Party, many of the major networks will not even report upon it. People do not know what to believe today. Social media does bring some good information, but it is very difficult to sort out what is taking place. I hope that you listen to some of the things that I've said. I hope that you go out and do some of your research. And I hope that you join together. Get rid of the graft and corruption in government, put good people in, and the growth of the country will be assured. So thank you for allowing me to speak. I thoroughly appreciate it.
Thank you, Rush, and thank you, President Roosevelt.
Yes, thank both of you. I really enjoyed it. I got to go back and listen to the answers. But what I was hearing was great stuff. Next week, we are going to be channeling two of the great generals of the Civil War, Ulysses Grant on the Union and Confederate General Robert E. Lee, the commander of forces for the Confederacy. It should be quite a show. We're going to discuss many things, especially the role of slavery in the Civil War, how decisions were made, and how the lessons of the past should be used to understand the future. I've got 9 books on Amazon. My latest book, Messages of the Prophet Muhammad for a Modern World, consists of messages that we've channeled from him through the years. It's available on Amazon, softcover as an ebook, in both English and Spanish.
Okay, if you'd like to see more of our channelings, they are on videos covering all aspects of the afterlife on our YouTube channel in the name of Barry Strohm.
Okay, folks, thank you so much for listening. Join us next week. I'm sure you're going to enjoy it. We are here every Sunday night at 9 p.m. Eastern Time on the Para-X Radio Network.
And I would like to thank you all for joining us. God bless you all. Have a wonderful week.
Thanks for listening to Channeling History. Tune in again next week for another electrifying episode, as we never know who will make an appearance or who will come through the portal. Any rebroadcast or other use of this program without explicit permission is strictly prohibited. Copyright 2020. Our Story Begins by Kevin MacLeod, licensed through Incompetech.com.